Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In this video, we're going to check out Proxmox, and specifically what we're going to do is set up unattended upgrades. The thing is, as administrators, it's important that we keep up on updates, and sometimes we're so busy that it can be hard to go back and make sure that everything was updated. But thankfully, with Proxmox, we can set up unattended upgrades to automate that for us. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you everything that you'll need to know to set up unattended upgrades within Proxmox. I'll show you how to set it up. I'll go over some best practices and tips. It's going to be a lot of fun, and by the end of this video, you'll have unattended upgrades installed on your Proxmox instance. So without any further hesitation, let's dive in right now. In this section, I'm going to go over some important considerations to keep in mind before we actually set up unattended upgrades, which is the name of the service that we'll be using to automate updates. And the first of these is that you might want to take a moment and audit which virtual machines and containers are set up to automatically start. Reason being, as part of the process of setting up unattended upgrades, we'll be setting a time for our server to automatically reboot to apply those updates. If you do have any VMs or containers that aren't configured to automatically start up, then you'll wake up to some of your servers not being available, and that's not good. To check that, all you have to do is click on a VM. So click on this one right here. Then you go to Options, and then you make sure that Start at Boot is set to Yes. That's really important. Now, of course, you might have one or more servers that aren't intended to automatically start. For example, I have this server right here, and as you can see, it is not set to start at boot. And that's okay because I don't want that one to start up automatically. Reason being, you might have a test server or something like that that is just used for one-off testing. In that case, you might not want it to start automatically. But what you want to do is go through each of the virtual machines on your list and just make sure that any resource that should automatically start is set up to do so. Another consideration is that you might want to consider setting up outbound email so that way you can get an email report anytime updates happen. And these reports will give you peace of mind when they report success, as well as alert you to issues if the process fails for some reason. Now, this isn't required, but it is a good idea. Also, not everyone is going to have an outbound email service to use, so if you don't have one, then you can skip this section if it doesn't pertain to you. Now, if you do want to set up outbound email, here's how you do it. First, you go to Data Center. Then you'll scroll down and find Notifications right here, so we'll click on that. And then what you could do is add a notification target by clicking this box right here, and then you could add the appropriate option. So if you have an SMTP server, for example, we could click on that. And then here we get a list of fields we could fill out to set up our email server. Now obviously the values that you'll enter here depend on your email service of choice, and again, not everyone is going to have one. But if you do have an email provider, then you probably have these values, so you can go ahead and insert them here to set up outbound email. My final tip for this section is to test whether or not your server is able to actually reboot at all. I know this sounds strange, but I've seen issues where there's a Proxmox server that hasn't been rebooted in a long time, and its boot configuration ended up being incorrectly configured at some point. If there's any misconfiguration on your server, it's a good idea to be aware of it now rather than waking up to find out that it never came back online. I've also seen issues with updates causing odd behavior as well, so believe it or not, it happens. So make sure you reboot your Proxmox server at some point to test it out, and be sure to let your team know that you plan on doing this if you're working for a company. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's get unattended upgrades installed and configured. In order to set up unattended upgrades, the first thing we're going to do is access a shell to our server. On my end, I'm going to use SSH. That's easier for me, and also it makes it easier to adjust the font size to ensure that you guys are able to see the output. However, you don't have to use SSH. What you could also do is click on your server, mine's already selected right here, and then you simply click on Shell, and that gives you a bash prompt to your server. But what I'm going to do is switch over to a terminal, and I'm going to show you the process through SSH. Regardless of whether you use the shell right here or an SSH connection, the steps will be exactly the same. Here on my terminal, to connect to the server via SSH, I'll type SSH. I'm going to use the root user for this connection. Now, it's always better to use a non-root user whenever you can, but in this case, it's just a demo installation of Proxmox, so I don't really care too much about that. Anyway, I'll type @ and then I'll type in the IP address. In my case, that's 172.16.249.75. So let's log in and get started. As you can see, I'm connected to my server via SSH, so let's get into it. And the first command that I'm going to have you run will update our package repository index just to make sure the package cache is up to date. To do that, we're going to run apt-update. And as an aside, if you're using a non-root user, you'll need to use sudo in front of commands like this, but I'm going to omit that since sudo is not required for root. Anyway, I'll press enter. In this case, I get a few messages that tell me that I'm unauthorized, but that doesn't matter in this case. This is just a demo server. Now on my end, my production server does have a subscription to the enterprise repository, but by default, you're not going to have that. It shouldn't matter when it comes to showing you the steps to set up unattended upgrades, so we'll ignore that in my case. Anyway, next what we're going to do is install the package that'll give us access to automatic updates. So we'll install the Unattended Upgrades package. To do that, we'll type apt install, and then unattended-upgrades, just like that. That'll install the package that we need to get things going. So I'll press enter. I'll press enter again to accept the default of yes. And now the package is installed. Next, what we're going to do is run the command that I'm going to give you. It's a longer command, but what this command is going to do is make sure that the process is enabled. So what we'll do is type dpkg-reconfigure. We'll set the priority to low, and we want to run this against the package that we just installed. I'll press enter. And it's asking me if I want to automatically download and install updates. Yes, I do. So I'll press enter since yes is selected. And actually, that's it. As an aside, I do have a list of commands within the blog post for this video, and I'll include a link in the description below. That way, if you want to copy and paste commands, you'll be able to do so. Anyway, the next thing we're going to do is check the status of unattended upgrades to make sure that it's enabled. And to do that, we'll type systemctl and then status, and then we'll run that against the unattended-upgrade service. And that's the name of the service that's installed along with the package. It has the same name. So I'll press enter, and we'll see in this case, it's enabled and running. If for some reason it's showing that it's disabled and/or it's showing that it's inactive, meaning that it's not running, what you could do is run systemctl, and then enable, --now, and then unattended-upgrades just like that. Now I don't need to run that on my end because it does show enabled and also that it's running. But again, if yours doesn't show either of those, you can run this command right here to make sure that it's enabled and running. And believe it or not, after running just those few commands, we're done with the process of enabling automatic updates. However, in order to get the most out of the service, we should tune and configure it to meet our needs. So what I'll do right now is show you some useful tweaks that you can make to your configuration. To get started with that, we're going to change a directory, and we'll go into /etc/apt, then apt.conf.d, just like that. And here we have some config files we can edit to set various options. And to edit the first one, we'll type nano, and then 20 auto upgrades. Just like that. So I'll press enter. And we don't have all that much going on here, but we want to make sure that everything is 1, which means enabled. If you see other numbers here, just make sure that yours looks like mine, and that should be all there is to it. If you do make changes, you can save your changes by holding Control and then pressing O. That'll give you the ability to save the file, even though I didn't make any changes. And then when you're done, hold Control and press X to exit out. Anyway, let's move on to the next file. And the next file that we're going to work with is 50 unattended upgrades. But instead of editing that file directly, what we're going to do instead is make a copy of it. So I'll use the cp command, and then what I'm going to do is give it another name. I'm going to give it a higher number this time around, but I'm going to leave the rest of the file name the same. And now when I check the directory listing, we'll see the new file right there at the end. Now you might be curious why I decided to make a copy of that file rather than editing the original. And there's an important reason why I decided to do so. The 50 unattended upgrades file is supplied by the distribution, and it's always possible that if unattended upgrades itself gets updated, that file could be replaced, and that would mean that you might lose all of your changes. By making a copy of this file and giving it a higher number, we're overriding the original file, and that also means we don't care if the original file gets replaced with an update, since the higher numbered file will supersede it anyway. Now what we'll do is open up that file and make some changes to it. So I'll type nano, and then the file name. And the first thing we're going to do is scroll down, just going to center it on the screen right here. We're going to update the origins pattern. Now when it comes to this file in particular, if a line begins with 2 backslashes, that means it's a comment and it's going to be ignored. There's quite a few comments in this file that we're going to ignore, but here in the Unattended Upgrade Origins Pattern section, what we're doing is we're telling Proxmox where we want to allow automatic updates to come from. In this case, the Debian repository and the 2 security repositories are not commented out, so that means those configuration items are going to apply to our configuration. Now, I don't recommend that you uncomment the other origins. I mean, you can do that, but I don't recommend it. Reason being, when it comes to unattended upgrades, it's important on a production server to only install security updates and not everything. When it comes to the proposed updates in the updates repositories, those are going to have feature improvements for the most part, which isn't really something we care about when it comes to security. Instead, what we're going to do is make sure that we're only getting updates from the security repositories and Debian itself. Anything that represents a backport, a feature update, or a proposed update is just not relevant to what we're doing. And everything I just said is true when it comes to Linux in general, but when it comes to Proxmox, it's even more important not to update everything. And this could be a real problem for Proxmox because sometimes newer major versions of Proxmox will require manual intervention during the upgrade process, and without you being present to perform those steps, you might end up encountering issues. Whenever Proxmox does release a major new version, they'll include a list of steps that you might need to do manually in order to complete the process. And the thing is, automatic upgrades is, well, automatic. So if you're not in front of the server to perform those steps, you might have problems. Instead of dealing with that, we can instruct unattended upgrades to only install security updates, and focusing on just those will prevent your server from being automatically updated to a major new release of Proxmox. Anyway, there's other options that I recommend that you take a look at. So what I'll do right now is scroll down to the next one. And the next one is this one, Unattended Upgrade Autofix Interrupted DPKG. Now in this case, there is a comment next to this line, but the default is set to true. I like to be explicit when it comes to my configuration, so what I'm going to do is uncomment this line right here. And this option can really help you out. If for any reason the unattended upgrades process is interrupted, that could be a situation where you need to fix something. In this case, unattended upgrades will attempt to do that for you if there's ever a problem. Sorry to interrupt my own video, but I wanted to let you guys know about something really cool that I created recently. I put together the Ultimate Linux Commands Cheat Sheet, a downloadable PDF that covers all the essential Linux commands, as well as some great bash aliases, hardening tips, and other nuggets that I've picked up over the years. For just a $3 donation, it's yours, and it makes a great reference for those of you that work with a terminal. And while you're there, check out my other products at the shop as well. There's all kinds of Linux-themed products there, for example, t-shirts like the Dark Side of the Terminal, there's a classic Debian swirl tee, and even a shirt to warn those around you that you're obsessed with Linux. Every purchase helps keep this channel going. There's a lot of cost involved with editing all the content for you guys, and it also helps justify the amount of caffeine that I go through while I edit these videos. As always, thank you guys so much for supporting Linux learning. I really appreciate it. Now, let's get back to the video. Anyway, continuing, there's a number of options that pertain to email alerts. So what I'll do is scroll down and find the first one. And the first of those is this option right here, Unattended Upgrade Mail. This gives you the ability to specify an email address that any reports are sent to when the service runs. Now, of course, this will only work if you set up outbound email within Proxmox itself, and this isn't going to apply to all of you because, again, not everyone is going to want that. But if you do, all you have to do is uncomment this line right here, and then you'll type your email address. So what I'll do right now is type in my email address, and there it is. So basically, all you do right here is uncomment this line and then add your email address. It's as simple as that. Anyway, the next option we're going to look at is this one right here. Unattended Upgrade Mail Report. And what we'll do is remove the slashes, and then you can consider changing this option right here. If you set it to on change, what that means is you're going to get an email report for just about anything that happens through this service anytime something is changed. And perhaps that might be what you want. On my end, I do enjoy having a report that's sitting in my inbox that tells me whether or not it was successful. But optionally, you could change this to only on error if you want to only be notified when there's a problem. So if you want that, all you have to do is change it accordingly. And that's all there is to it. The next option right here is completely optional, but I do recommend it. As updates are installed on your server, older kernels might still be installed after the fact. What this is going to do, if enabled, is remove any unused kernel packages that may be installed, and this might be important depending on how you have everything partitioned. Kernel packages do take storage space, so what this is going to do is just remove any that you're not using. You could always do this yourself after the fact, but I like to have this process automated as well. Also, you might have unused dependencies after you update, and that's just something that happens with Linux package managers in general. It's completely optional, but I'm going to uncomment this line right here because I like to keep everything clean. Specifically, this option right here is going to remove any newly unused dependencies, and this option down here, the very next one, if we uncomment that one, it's going to also remove any unused dependencies that existed before the update process happened. Again, it's optional, but I do recommend it. Continuing, let's look at the next option, and I'll center the screen here, put it near the top. And it's this one right here. I'm going to uncomment this option, and what this is going to do is give you the option to automatically reboot your server after it's updated if it needs to be rebooted. Not every update is going to require a reboot of your server, but kernels and things like that will. So if you want to, you can set it up to automatically reboot. And I highly recommend that everyone does this. Reason being, when it comes to updating your system, if an update requires a reboot and you never reboot, then it's the same as never updating that particular package. In this case, you can make sure that a reboot happens if it needs to. Also, we have this option right here. I'll uncomment this one as well. It's set to true, which is where I'm going to leave it. And what this pertains to is if you have any users that are logged in to your Proxmox server when it goes to update, and then you also have it set to automatically reboot, it may or may not reboot the system if users are logged in. In this case, we are making sure that no matter what, it's going to reboot the server. And the reason why this is important is because, humans being humans, sometimes someone might leave a session open and then forget about it. If that happens, then your server will never reboot, and that's not good. So we want to enable this option right here to ensure that the reboot happens. Continuing, we could also choose when the server is going to reboot. In this case, you could just choose a time where your server is not expected to have that much use. In this case, I could just set it to 4 a.m. or something like that. If you're using Proxmox within a company, you could simply set this to whatever your maintenance time happens to be. In the case of a home lab, you could simply set this to whatever time you're expecting to be asleep by. Either way, you could choose the time where the reboot happens, and that's about it. Anyway, when it comes to this particular file, that's all I wanted to show you. There's other options that you could browse through if you want to, but for the most part, those are the ones that most people will need to edit. To save the file, I'm going to hold Control and press O, press Enter to confirm, and then Control X to exit out of the editor. The next thing we're going to do is set the time when automatic updates happen. We've already changed the time when the server will reboot itself when we edited the previous file, but when it comes to kicking off the update process itself, we'll configure that in a different place. To do that, what we'll do is run systemctl, and then edit, and then we'll edit a very specific service. What we'll do is edit the app daily upgrade timer. And what this is a systemd timer. I've covered systemd timers in another video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it here. But you could think of systemd timers as, well, a timer. When it goes off, something happens. Anytime you want something to happen at a specific time, then you might consider creating a timer for that. Sometimes when you install packages, like Unattended Upgrades in this case, it's going to include a timer, and this timer right here was installed as part of the process. Anyway, I'll press Enter, and now we find ourselves back in an editor again. Now, for those of you that have never updated a systemd timer before, the process might be a bit confusing, but what I'll do is go over the process, and it should make sense shortly. What I'll do right here is copy this particular section, and then what I'll do is paste it right here. So we have the same information, but what we want to do is uncomment these lines right here. And it should look something like that. Now, since I do have a video that covers systemd timers in more detail, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about it here, but what I will do is leave a card for the systemd timer video right about here in case you want to check it out. But what we're doing right here is we're going to override the timer section, and as you can see from the comments here, anything between the second line and then the comment right below that is going to apply to the timer, but anything below that is not going to apply to it. Now you'll notice that I didn't copy unit or the install sections because I want those sections to stay the same. But what I do want to do is edit the time when the timer happens, so that way I can control when the automatic update process happens. My recommendation is to set this to about 1 hour before the automatic reboot time. In the other config file, I set that to 4 a.m., so what I'll do is set this to 3 a.m. And that's essentially what that particular line does. Now when it comes to the randomized delay, what that means is it's going to add a randomized delay to the timer, which means in this case that the timer will start at 3 a.m., but it'll actually trigger at some point within 60 minutes after that. And the reason why a randomized delay is important is because when it comes to security, you really don't want things to be too predictable. Yes, we do want to install automatic updates around 3 a.m., but we don't necessarily need it to happen right at 3 a.m. For example, if a threat actor is trying to break into your system and there's a vulnerability with Unattended Upgrades itself, then they might know that the process kicks off at 3 a.m., and if there's a vulnerability that they could take advantage of, then they know when exactly to execute that vulnerability. By adding a randomized delay, then that makes it a little less predictable. Now in this case, the randomized delay is set to 60 minutes, which means it might actually collide with the automatic reboot. Again, I set mine to happen at 4 a.m. So what we could do is just lower this a bit. I'll just lower it to around 10 minutes. I think that's good enough for an example. In this case, if we set it up like this, Unattended Upgrades will start between 3 a.m. and 3:10 a.m. I think that's good enough for me, so what I'm going to do is save the file. Again, Control-O and then Enter, and then Control-X to exit out. And you know what? We're almost done, but there's a few quick things that we'll do to ensure that everything is working, and then we'll be all set. So to wrap it up, what we're going to do is instruct the underlying Linux system that we've made changes to the files that we updated earlier. To do that, we can run systemctl and then daemon reload. Just like that. Now we're not expecting any output from this, but essentially what this does is cause systemd to reload the configuration files that it's responsible for. Another thing we're going to do is restart the unattended upgrade service itself. To do that, we'll type systemctl, then restart, and then unattended upgrades. After we do that, we should check the status of unattended upgrades just to make sure that it's working if there's any issues or anything with the configuration files. For example, if there's a typo, then the process may or may not have started, so we need to check that. In this case, we see it's active and running, so far so good. Next, what we'll do is check the timer that we updated earlier to make sure that it shows the proper time. And to check that, we can run systemctl, status, apt-daily-upgrade.timer, just like that. In this case, we can see that it's going to trigger at 3:04 in the morning, and there's 11 hours left until the process kicks off. Essentially, what we're looking for is to make sure that the trigger is set to happen around the time that we set up earlier. And you know what? So far, so good. Finally, what we're going to do is test the unattended upgrades process itself. There's actually a command that we can use to simulate the process without actually running any updates. To do that, we'll type unattended-upgrade --dry-run --debug, just like that. So again, this is not going to actually install any updates, but what this will do is test that it's working properly and simulate what an update might look like. It's going to check for updates that are available, and it's going to pretend to install them. At least that way, generally the process is configured correctly. So what I'll do is press enter, and let's see what happens. As you can see, it's going through the process right now. And it really does look like it's installing things, doesn't it? But actually, it's not. On the bottom, it even says all upgrades were installed. However, if I was to try and install updates manually, maybe with a command like this one, you'll see that there's still packages that are set to be updated. In the case of unattended upgrades, again, it simulated the process, and that's good for helping make sure that everything is configured properly, but the dry run option is not going to actually install anything. At this point, I think our server is ready to go. I'm going to cancel this particular update right here. My server is going to update this morning anyway, but you know what? We did it. We set up unattended upgrades in Proxmox, and I hope it helped you out. And there's our video. In this video, we set up unattended upgrades in Proxmox, and I really hope it helped you out. If it did, then be sure to click that like button to let YouTube know. I would really appreciate that. And also be sure to subscribe to Learn Linux TV for the latest in Linux. There's all kinds of Linux-related shenanigans happening on this channel and coming very soon, and I can't wait for you guys to see my latest videos. Anyway, with all of that said, thank you guys so much for checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one.